All right, I think we're live. Anyone in the chat can hear me, just push one, just doing the mic check. All right, got a confirmation. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 818, Black Tech Talk. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust. Also, there's a link in the chat. If you want to join the panel, it's a Zoom link. Make sure you update your Zoom client before joining. All right, let's get started. So quarterly discussion. Citizen Lou had a brief discussion on his channel. I wanted to make sure I followed up on what he was discussing in terms of AI, but not necessarily focused on one subject, but just what is everybody doing right now? What are you studying? What books are you reading? What's on your mind in terms of tech? I think for me, I'll start off with myself. I think for me, one of my big focuses right now has been really smart cities, really thinking about smart cities, and really thinking about the overarching perspective of what a smart city actually looks like from an Afro-futurist perspective. And I say Afro-futurist because I'm thinking about it through the lens of Blackness, through the lens of an African, a Pan-African perspective, from the lens of a Black man. What does a smart city look like? Because you have smart homes, you have the term smart city, but we don't really break it down into smart neighborhoods, right? And I think what happens for me is when they talk about smart cities, a lot of your business models, a lot of your architectural models are not really inclusive for Black people, right? You'll look at these models, and you'll see these white people or Eurocentric people inside of them, and what I find is that it's not all that inclusive, right? They'll talk about a smart city, but it's always without Black people's being stakeholders in it. And so I definitely want to, that's what's on my mind, or what's been on my mind probably for the last couple of years, but more intensely now, especially with talk about AI, because with AI, everybody's just using the term AI, but no one's really going into the depth of it, as to how does it work mechanically, what are some of the structures in place and the ethics behind it. No one's really having that conversation. Everybody's just having a conversation about job displacement. And I think that that's too easy of a discussion. It's too basic. And so I don't really engage in those discussions all that much in the manosphere, the Black manosphere for that matter, primarily because I think it's too simple. And it's usually outside of the context of what AI really is. And so when I see or when I hear discussions around tech in this space, it's really not so much as cringy, but it's like there are a lot of people who are talking about tech, but they're not really in tech. Whether it's information technology, operational technology, industrialization, that they don't work in it, and so they kind of just use terms out of context and whatnot, and they try to make it seem like, by dominating the conversation that, they're also a part of the same thing. And it's like, not necessarily. And I don't want to be exclusive and try to, jump on anybody's panel and try to kick them out or marginalize them. I just want, it's just, there's a difference between two tech people talking and a non-tech person engaging in the conversation. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be involved in the conversation, but sometimes they push a lot of rhetoric that's just not true. And so I find that hold on a second. Yeah, I find that when we have these discussions, it's always at the surface level, but not necessarily, it doesn't go into a whole lot of depth because the audience that we have isn't a majority tech audience in the Black manosphere. And one of the goals that I've always had with the Black Brain Trust is to try to bring or create more citizen developers or more citizen tech people, right? Take the non-tech person and bring them into the tech space and bring them in, and then help them find their way, right? What's their niche? What's their desire? What do they see from the tech perspective, and make it a little bit more inclusive from that, from that way. And so when we talk about, again, going back to my theory about smart cities being more inclusive, that's kind of what I envision a smart city to be, where you have an actual democracy, right? Democracy isn't about voting. That's one part of democracy, but it's not the totality of democracy. Democracy for me, in regards to smart cities, is having equal access or a level of literacy that is compliant with the needs of the people for them to properly engage the society that they live in. And I think that what happens in a lot of these discussions is that we don't really look at tech from a Black perspective. We look at it from a overarching white perspective. We think about Mark Zuckerberg, we think about Elon Musk, we think about these sort of tech titans, but we don't really think about it from a ground level as to where Black people are, right? And especially Black men. Where are we in all of this? I don't care what organization you work for. I don't care what school you graduated from. I don't care about all that stuff. I care about, okay, how are you making the technology impactful for the people on the ground, right? Yeah, you work for a big organization. Yeah, you do this, and that, but how are you making it impactful for people on the ground? And I think that part goes missing a lot more often than not when it comes to these discussions. And so you don't really see me involved in a lot of panel discussions like that, because I just can't do it. I see things differently. The real DEI would be, making it more equitable for people on the ground, not necessarily for people in the office. I think that approach has always been wrong. That's kind of been the downfall of DEI, that everybody is looking at it from a Black people are just getting over, with these initiatives, and it's like, not necessarily. Black people are kind of like the least to benefit from DEI or affirmative action, but you have a lot of people who think that when it comes to corporate America, that's the pinnacle. And I'm like, maybe for you, but not for me. I don't really see it that way. I always see it from a perspective of, you're doing what you need to do to get by, but when you step out of the office, who are you after that? Can you really transfer a lot of that knowledge and skill set to folks on the ground in the civilian part, right, outside of the corporate part? And so I feel like that's what's missing in the manosphere, in a lot of Black manosphere discussions. There's a lot of chest thumping out there, but we don't really actually have discussions around tech at that level, from a Black perspective, from a Pan-African perspective, and stuff like that. And so those are some of the things that have been on my mind for the quarter. It's actually been on my mind for quite some time. It's one of the reasons why I go back and forth to Africa a lot, because that's when you go over there, their perspective on tech is different than Americans, or at least for Black Americans. And they look at tech from how do we make this work for us? Whereas in America, I see that a lot of Black people want to be the first to adopt tech, right? First adopters. And so when they do that, what happens here is the conversation only starts and stops at what technology they've adopted, whether it's the iPhone or the iPad or the Apple MR, mixed reality or something like that. They don't really have a conversation about, okay, where I'm from, let's say if I was in Alabama or Mississippi in the South, right? When some of the rural areas. Okay, so how do I make that tech work to the advantage of the people on the ground there that are actually hyper distressed, right? Usually 125% below the poverty line and don't have a substantial amount of income. Digital poverty is a real thing, right? Digital literacy is a real thing. You really can't have a smart city if people are functional illiterates. That's impossible. Yeah, the systems and structures work, but it doesn't work to their benefit because they don't understand the technology themselves. And so I think that's what frustrates me. And I think I've swayed away from the corporate aspect of tech and worrying about which brand name, publicly traded organization you work for, to what does it mean to us, right? The governance piece, right? Governance is about who are we to each other from an Africana perspective. Social structure is that corporate side, right? Who are we to those people? And how do we engage them, or how do they engage us? And I don't want to be trapped in that on that hamster wheel. And I see a lot of Black people, especially Black women, on LinkedIn, where they're really out there with it. And maybe that's how they make their ends meet. But what I see is that there's a lot of people who live for the LinkedIn lifestyle, where they're constantly posting, they're doing this and they're doing that, and there's pictures here and there's they're sharing content and stuff. And I'm like, that's not who I am. I don't really vibe with all that, man. I'm just not down with that. And so I don't use LinkedIn a lot at all. I actually pulled away from LinkedIn long before George Floyd. If you go through like the Brain Trust archive, you'll hear like me really criticize LinkedIn and people on there, primarily because I don't think that a lot of people on there are actually operating in good faith. Because I remember a time before George Floyd, when you couldn't really talk about BLM, where there was no real hashtag supporting Black folks in tech and stuff like that. There was nothing like that. Now you got, SANS coming out with their own little thing about, being inclusive. But before George Floyd, they wasn't doing all that, right? And so I find that to be very disingenuous. If you really want to be inclusive, why don't you put some money into a fund and actually start funding Black startups, like Google did, right? Fund Black founders, right? But they don't actually do that. And I don't hear a lot of Black people in social media really having that conversation. We're probably one of the few spaces where you can actually openly have that conversation with the data on display and say, no, we're not getting our fair share of the pie, right? Black people get less than 1% of seed funding, Series A, Series B funding when it comes to startup ventures. And I think that if there's no equity there, then what are we really talking about? And so these are a lot of things that I've always had this on my mind and really been pushing it through the Brain Trust. But this quarter has really opened up my mind to a lot of things that I've seen, especially with AI. Everybody's talking about AI, but they're not really talking about the impact of it. So. Yeah, I see a lot of people in the chat room. I've pinned the Zoom link to the top of the chat room. So if anybody wants to join, I won't be on here long, maybe about an hour or so. But I'm just saying, going back to my original point, I don't see a lot of people really having those healthy dialogues at all. It seems like everybody's just kind of talking about the technology, but not necessarily putting in context how it impacts people on the ground. So those are sort of some of the ideas I've had in the for the quarter. And this may be my last go around. I think 2024, and I've said this on the Brain Trust a couple of years ago, I think by 2025, I'm out of the corporate sector. I think I'm done with that. Not necessarily being a consultant, but more along the lines of creating something that is going to be impactful later. I don't really see the future for Black people, especially Black men in corporate. I think that if we want to be more inclusive in the tech sector, I don't think that corporate America is the place to be for that inclusivity. I think that if you want inclusivity and inclusiveness of Black people inside the tech sector, I think that has to be an industry thing. I don't think that, you know, people working for Bank of America or name your publicly traded organization. I don't think that that's the goal. I don't think that working for white people is the goal. I think that Black people building their own spaces is the ultimate goal. I think the entrepreneurship route and having a seat at the table is the ultimate goal. I think that should be the ultimate goal. And not a seat at their table, but us creating our own table and having a seat there. Why should we be at their table when they weren't being inclusive in the first place? We're still seeing the numbers fall, right? 2022, less than 1%. 1%. Black people have 1% of venture capital put in on a global scale. For 2023, it's less. And for 2024, it's projected to be even more less because VCs are tightening up and the industry is constricting. Look at the cybersecurity layoffs that are happening right now between Rapid7, SecureWorks, what's the other company that just slipped my mind? I think it was HP. And so companies are starting to constrict and say that they're consolidating, but I'm saying, okay, what's the next step? We've heard this story before, but what's the next step? And so the sequel has to be better than the first one. We've already heard and seen the first movie. We need to know what the sequel is going to be. Okay. So those are some of the things that's been on my mind. I think that I'm still seeing Black people kind of latch on to, corporate tech as if it's the end all be all. And I'm like, maybe a master's degree is not going to be the best thing for you. Maybe that's not the case. Because I work with quite a few people who have master's degrees and they're not doing anything from a cybersecurity perspective or just the IT perspective. They're not doing anything, with their master's degree. It's actually pretty useless to them. And so there's a lot of what we call five monkeys theory, right? Where you have these people who are battling over a banana at the top of the ladder. That's really elusive. Okay. There's a lot of people who spent 5, 10 plus years in a role and they have not moved up. There's a real glass ceiling there. Not saying that there's not a glass ceiling, but I think that, okay, so what are you doing what are we doing collectively to actually address the glass ceiling effect? I don't really see too many people doing anything about it. It seems like folks are kind of satisfied in their roles and they feel like they're being threatened if you speak out about it. And it's like, no, there's something wrong here. If all of your leadership, if 70% of your leadership is white and 1% or even, less than 10% are Black, and, and the only Black people who are in leadership roles are the DEI officers, that's a problem. That means the DEI program, the initiative isn't working. It doesn't work. And so there's a lot of folks who were like really wearing the corporate brand. They got the T-shirt, the polos, and the Patagonia, sort of vest and jackets and stuff like that, looking crazy, got the backpacks, all the swag and stuff. And like, this is what you spent all this time in school going for? I don't think that's the best thing. I don't see that as a reward, but maybe they see it as a reward. I don't see it as a reward. I just think that some of the ideals that they have are not really falling in line with my perspective. And so really crazy. But to each his own. What else is going on? There's a lot of AI talk. I think that Lou kind of covered the AI piece, but we were talking about AI on the Brain Trust some time ago. In fact, engineering cannabis has kind of been the SME, the subject matter expert on AI, machine learning. And he's right, the industry is only like 2% Black, 2.5% Black at best. And at that point, you need minimum master's degree. You need, minimum master's degree to really playing in that field at that level, because you just haven't had the structural discipline to really be the head of anything, without it. So. Yeah, I see people commenting in the chat. Yeah, and so the AI piece in the manosphere gets talked about a lot, but it gets talked about in a way that most of these guys, I don't think they really understand. I think it's good to read articles. We do it, but we also put our emphasis as to how it relates to some of the stuff that we do and some of the stuff that we see coming down the pike in terms of how it's going to impact folks on the ground. Not so much about, it's going to just take your job and that's just going to be the end of the discussion. That's too basic. In the manosphere, I think a lot of people are just talking about AI without the large language model perspective in place. I think that, there's a lot of people who are just like, I've been studying AI since the 1980s. And it's like, no, that's just not true. That's just not true. Because if that was the case, you would be a scientist by now. There's no way you could have been studying it for the last 20 years, but you don't work in tech. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think age, just kind of segue in, age discrimination, ageism. A lot of Black folks who are past 45, 50, especially that 50 plus mark, it starts to get really tight. I talk to a lot of brothers who are in that 48 plus club, and they, they see the tough times that they're having. A lot of brothers who they've reached the glass ceiling. They can't go any further past where they are. And I'm like, I think that it's time to reevaluate our relationship with corporate America. I think there's time for us to reevaluate what's the next step. It's one thing to not like Black people, not like people who are of a certain age, but then when you add Blackness to it, that becomes a big problem, right? A Black man who is confident about what he wants to do, he's 48 plus, 50 plus. Some of these white folks are not going to be really receptive to what you have to say, because they already got a problem with Black masculinity in the first place in corporate settings. Add on an age piece where either you might be superior to them in age, or you're both superior in age and knowledge, and they're still unwilling to accept. That's the real glass ceiling, right? Not the, oh, I achieved master's degree, I did, CISSP, and now, I haven't moved up. No, that's not what I'm talking about. That real glass ceiling where you're running into the microaggressions that don't allow you to demonstrate what you're capable of doing in the same environment that they're in, while they get kudos for all of your ideas and you get nothing out of it. That's the real glass ceiling for me. Okay. But those are some of the challenges. Like I said, the Black perspective is different when you start talking about tech. And you start talking about what AI's impact is going to be, because we already see it now with the tech layoffs. The first people they got rid of was the DEI hires and the DEI officers. But why? Why did they feel the need to get rid of those people, right? But then they utilize Indian, Pakistani, Central Asian people to rationalize what their DEI program has achieved, right? And they'll say, oh, we've reached diversity here and there. And I'm like, that's not necessarily DEI though. Because if you live in a place like Atlanta, I think Atlanta might be not be the best example. Because when I was in Atlanta, they had a really substantial amount of Black folks in tech down there. But I think that, let's say if you're in Ohio, right? If you're in Ohio, that is different than it is in Atlanta, because most of the, most of your leadership in Atlanta is pretty much Black dominated. But when you go into the other areas, North Carolina, the Triangle, DC for that matter, you do have Black folks in tech in these areas, but they're not at the level where you expect them to be. I think that whiteness is the frosting on that glass ceiling, right? There is that proverbial glass ceiling, but the whiteness is what creates the frost that you can't see through as to what the next step is. How do we walk back, reassess, and then say, okay, what's the next step? You're 50 plus. What's the next step? Why are we still going through these interviews? Why are we still, looking for references on LinkedIn and whatnot? We should be beyond that. Right? We should be beyond that. Getting a lot of messages coming in. Yeah, we should be beyond that. And I think that what's happening in the manosphere is that conversation is not being had at all. You got military vets in here. You got allegedly tech folks in here. You got a lot of 80% of the certain subscribers make $80,000 more, but no one can actually prove any of that. How can the conversation is only at the surface level? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so what we've done on the Brain Trust with tech talks and space and technology and stuff like that, these discussions, it's not just about reading the articles. It's always about creating a narrative and putting things into context so that we can actually have a deeper dive as to, okay, what does this mean, right? We just covered micromobility last week, right? The state of micromobility in Black communities. And we've shown what happens here when you have an agenda on the table, you have legislation and legislators and some money put behind it, things happen. But if you come in the manosphere, you don't really hear that sort of conversation happening, even offline too. And LinkedIn, I don't really see people having those conversations. People are trying to play it safe because they don't want to alienate their white base. They don't want to lose their constituents on that side, their white constituents, primarily because they are so invested into propping up this image of themselves on social media, which is LinkedIn. And so you see a lot of the fakeness being portrayed on there. And you really can't have that conversation openly because we're all, if white people are really concerned about it, what are they doing about it? Right? It's one thing to put on a silkscreen t-shirt, but then what do you do to further the conversation and move beyond the surface level discussion? I think cities and states and federal government play a significant role in this, but I think the federal government has more diversity when it comes to Black people because they've been kind of the forerunners with affirmative action. But when you start talking about the corporate sector, that's not necessarily true. There's still a lot of that discrimination in there. So ageism and, you know, the development of technology such as AI, large language model development. These are not things that are insurmountable, right? If we wanted to just pick up on the technology, we could just pick up on it and go. Everybody didn't start off in cybersecurity. That's just not true. You move to cybersecurity after you've reached that threshold in IT. I think that's where, you know, that crossover begins. But for a lot of Black people, if they're not able to get into IT at the level that they need to be, beyond the help desk, beyond the the field engineer, that becomes the gap, right? And so how do you actually move those Black people up in skill if you're not giving them the opportunity that they need? We need more boot camps. We need more boot camps that actually help upskill people by the people, by Black people. It can't be, you know, there's a lot of boot camps that's out there, but some of them are scams. They want you to have 50% of your pay, for the next 5 years when you get a job. I think that it's an insane perspective. That's an insane perspective. And so the glass ceiling isn't so much gender-based. It's not really about, women aren't moving up, and that's the reason why, we have glass ceiling. No, that stuff is way beyond gender. Stuff is, you feel it immediately when you come into the corporate sector, because you see a lot of people who have been there for X amount of time not moving up because whatever reason. You can add and fill in the blank. So how do you measure DEI at that level? Because if people aren't moving up, then what does that really mean? You can't just have people on LinkedIn with these sort of what do you call it? These marketing images where you see like the Black woman who's in a data center. I've worked in data centers. I've yet to see any Black woman in the data center before, right? Or you have these images of Black men and allegedly they're in AI, even though Black people only make up 2%, 2.5% of AI. Somehow all the marketing images have these sort of Black people there. They're artificially created. No pun intended. They're artificially created. And so it gives the illusion like they're actually being inclusive, but they're actually not. So at what point do we take a step back and say, okay, this isn't working. This relationship with corporate America isn't working. Then what's the next step? For me, the way I see the next step is there has to be a Pan-African component to this, because Africans are in the same position, but for different reasons. Colonialism has ruined their society in a way that, is unimaginable to us, but we're also running into the same glass ceiling. So their glass ceiling is due to colonialism, but our glass ceiling is just due to complete racism. Some of the ideas that we have fundamentally intersect with each other. Africans would love for nothing more than to build up their own Wakanda. Me too, right? we would like to do the same thing here. So you got to have people on the US side moving the needle, because they're also trying to move the needle over on the continent. But if you have people in the US who are, infatuated with the corporate life, being a corporate citizen, well, on the continent, that's not the case. They got to get it how they live. They eat what they kill. So that's why you see a lot of Python developers over there, a lot of Python coders over there, .NET or whatever, C++ for that matter. A lot of your 20th century languages are still being utilized over there, primarily because it's easily accessible. It's kind of easy to pick up on if you haven't really been involved in tech all that much. It's easy to pick up some of those languages, mostly because most people over there speak a second language other than English, right? French, Creole, there's a few other languages, that they speak. And so it makes it easier for them to pick up a programming language because that's just another syntax that they're just picking up on. But what I'm saying overall is that we have to start collaborating. There has to be a Pan-African lens to all of this. And I don't really hear these conversations being had in the space. I don't even see it happening in LinkedIn, which is why I don't really like LinkedIn. We have to have Black people, especially Black men, working with folks on the continent, really building a new ecosystem that works to our advantage. And we have to move away from the capitalist mindset that says, oh, look at me, Range Rover, Mercedes-Benz, balling out of control, tech life is great. That's not a measure of success anymore. That can't be the measure of success. The measure of success is what open source technology did we utilize to move the ball forward? And how many people of our people did we bring on? Because see, when those other folks was bringing their people in, it was okay for them. We have to look at it and say the same thing to ourselves, that no, it's okay for us to be selfish and I'm gonna bring in my Nigerian brothers. I'm gonna bring in some brothers from Ghana. I'm gonna bring in some brothers from Kenya. I'm gonna bring in some brothers from Rwanda. I'm gonna bring in some brothers from South Africa. Okay. And I'm gonna go to Atlanta. Yeah, I'm gonna go to Detroit. And I'm gonna hit the Bronx. And I'm gonna hit DC. You understand what I'm saying? There needs to be that level of energy. That's where the energy needs to be. Not about, well, AI is just going to take away jobs from Black men. Well, before ChatGPT, Black men weren't getting those jobs anyways. So, what are you talking about? I don't think that ChatGPT is the end all be all to the discussion. I think that discussion should be revolving around emerging technologies and emerging economies. 7 of the fastest growing economies right now on the continent of Africa. One of the fastest growing economies in America is the Black economy, collectively speaking. The ability to buy Yeezys and other sort of material items, the spending power behind it means that there's something there, but you also have to make it manifest in ways that can be beneficial for everyone else. I think that Black banks play a significant role in this. How do you get Black banks to get on board to start funding Black startups? How do you get city and state governments to start allocating resources for all of this? How do we start working with partners in Botswana, Ghana, and Rwanda to also collaborate with blue visas, right? Instead of a green card, what about a blue card? A blue card for entrepreneurs, people of the diaspora, working with folks over there and getting 1 year, 5 year, 3 year visas, blue cards, so that they can be working back and forth. We don't have to fill out all this paperwork. That takes away the need for all of the red tape, the bureaucracy that it takes to get over there and actually do things. That's why you see a lot of people, who do go to Africa, they tend to, they tend to either run out of money or come back to the United States, primarily because they didn't have a goal. They didn't have a game plan. The Pan-African thing is the game plan, right? If we believe in the unification of Black people globally under a scientific collectivist system, that's going to be the foundation. That's going to be the grounding for how we move forward. When I was in Ghana last year, I was having dinner with, actually having lunch initially with some of the blockchain developers over there. Those cats are hungry. Okay, them dudes are hungry over there. They don't have the mass transit system that New York has, or they don't have the, all the fanciness of Atlanta. But they're striving to get to a point because the perspective that Africans have had since the 30s and 40s and even probably even prior to that is that they're looking at Black people in America and they're saying that is a way for us to, to get to the next level. But if you have to actually use the Black manosphere, you'll find that you're going to be sorely disappointed with some of the discussions that go on in these spaces in regards to tech and entrepreneurship and just social ideals. I don't think you're going to be able to advance yourself in that perspective, but they do look at us from that perspective, right? When they see Future, these rappers, YSL, name your artists and whatnot. These trap house artists have become the new face of masculinity, and a lot of people don't know outside of the United States that that's not who we are. They don't really see Lupe Fiasco at MIT. They don't really see, Black Thought or, name your heavy bar spitters. We've been one of the first people in Black spaces from a channel perspective to start talking about hip hop as a science, right? Bars, hooks, beats, hi-hats, snares, kicks, drums. All of these things are components of the culture. But it's scientific because nobody else is doing it like we do, right? Yeah, you got Eminem and you got, a couple of other, white artists, but they're exceptions to the rule. Most of it is coming from folks like us, who look like us, who have completely reverse engineered all of the instruments and technology that produces music. You take 3/16s on a song plus the hook. That in itself, if you look at it from a sheet perspective, that's code. Because there's rhythm involved. And if the rhythm is off, with the exception of Dipset, because they always rap off beat, if the rhythm is off, the song is going to fail. And so it takes a lot of work to put those 3/16s in the hook together in order to make a complete product. If you take lyrics and put them into code, that's a coding language in itself. Hip hop is a coding language in itself. Because if the bars are weak, you're gonna say that the rapper is trash. Well, if your coding language is weak too, if the output is if the input is whack, the output is going to be whack. You're going to have memory dumps all day, right? CPU utilization through the roof because it was just poor to begin with. And so I just think that when it comes to culture and we start thinking about hip hop as an example, we can see the scientific method involved in that. And these are people who have never been to school for computer science at all. When you think about Black women and how they braid hair and how they can just do it off the cuff, there's an engineering aspect to all of that with the braided patterns and stuff, the ability to take different sorts of oils and shea butter, whatever it is that they use. There's an engineering aspect to that. Because you don't see white people doing it, or Europeans for that matter. They don't do things like that. Black women do that though, right? And they could do that, you know, almost with their eyes closed. So I think Black folks in America have a lot more to offer the industry than just working for corporate America. Okay. Sorry for the noise in the background. Our Latino friends are actually playing a lot of music out there. But the thing here is we have to start taking this to the next level. I don't think that beyond 2024, 2025, I think that the conversation has to change from who you work for to what is it that you're bringing to the industry. Oh, what's going on here? Yeah. So link is in the chat if anybody wants to get on, man. I won't spend too much time up here. Nobody comes up in the next 10 minutes or so. We'll just peel out, call it a day. But yeah, those are the things that's been on my mind, man, from a tech perspective. I think micromobility is one of those emerging markets that Black people should be focused on. I think Complex has been right for the last 6 or 7 years now, that there's something there. And now we see all the investment going into it. Yeah, going beyond the Jordans, man, going beyond the, I was at a Black business function with Ujima, or I think it's pronounced Ujima now. And what was being discussed there, one of the, I don't know what she is. She's not a chief financial officer, but she has something to do with like overseeing financial investments into Black businesses. And what she was talking about was that they don't want to see any more barbershops and salons when it comes to funding businesses. They want things that are going to have high growth. Okay, and they don't want to put their money. They want big projects. They want moonshots. You know, what are you actually revolutionary? What are you revolutionizing from a tech perspective is what they're basically saying. What are you doing? What does your product actually do? What is your idea? Let us help you move your idea from stage 1 to stage 2 and so on and so forth. Not saying you don't need barbershops and salons. I think that they're tired of the small investment. They're tired of the, because see, barbershops and stuff don't really scale, right? You can have more than one barbershop, but you can't actually have the barbershop has been, it's a career that doesn't really innovate all that much, right? It kind of stays the same, unless you have some other components to it, kind of like what you see with Matt Hoffer, with doing interviews at his barbershop, right? That's one area for content creation. But when you start talking about large language models, when you start talking about blockchain, when you start talking about fintech, autonomous vehicles, drones, mobile devices and stuff like that. That's what they're really looking at. Things that are going to shake up the industry. And then unfortunately, a lot of our folks got stuck in the bubble of development because they haven't really moved the needle beyond the ideation phase of contemporary development. So we got Alonzo Hall on the panel, man. What's going on, bro?
What's going on, brother? I wanted to speak literally to the barbershop thing. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.
So I have a relative who has a barbershop. He has 2, maybe 3 locations. And I'm very proud of him for that. But like you said, with Black businesses, unfortunately, it's too small of a scale. So I was asking him some things about his business. And I was like, oh, you mean like sports clips? Now, this is a gentleman who's been cutting hair since we were kids. Like, this is his passion, right? Yet he didn't know who Alonzo Herndon was, still doesn't know. Didn't know who or what sports clips or the lemon tree was. Before I continue, Mike, are you familiar with who or what sports clips and or the lemon tree is?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
Okay. So those are both commercial barbershops. Now, generally for Black people, we might not know of them. Are you familiar with Supercuts? Well, Supercuts is another one similar to the others. And the difficulty was being in this business. I was like, hey, are you, you have a sports themed barbershop. Are you trying to be like, do you want to study and kind of be like sports clips? And he goes, well, what's that? And I'm like, well, it's a barbershop chain with multiple locations across the US. Oh, we're a little different. Okay, well, I get that, but if we're going to study, we study the big boys, right? So they have 1,900 locations in the USA, and you've never, ever, ever heard of them. That is kind of what our issue is. As in terms of business, hey, I'm doing great. I got 3 locations, so I'm local, right? There's a barbershop chain in New York called Levels, but they're local. You can only go to the 5 boroughs of New York and go to one location in each of the 5 boroughs. However, if you look up Lemon Tree, Supercuts, or Sports Clips, you can find many locations across the country. Now, obviously, there are going to be some rural locations that don't have one, but just about every state in the country, you can find a Supercuts, Sports Clips, or Lemon Tree to go get your hair cut because it's a brand. It's just like if we start, I'm sure, Mike, with your constituents in the banking industry, with especially Black folks, not only barbershops and hair salons do they not want to see, but restaurants. Now, restaurants, unfortunately, are always a gamble, so they can't really not particularly want to see that. Unless it's like a franchise, though, I'm sure they're probably being a little more scrutinizing, because people are not even passing health code when they make this food. Just because you make some great fried chicken, don't mean you know how to replicate it. I'll pause there for a moment.
No, you're right on point with it, and I think that we need to have an entrepreneurship boot camp that helps Black people move into these emerging markets and away from the traditional 20th century things that we've been focusing on before. And so that you're right. You're right about what you're saying. Yeah, just pondering, man. There's a lot of thoughts, man. I'm seeing a lot of things that can be addressed with the collectiveness of Black folks. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of that discussion really happening in this space or even in the other non-YouTube spaces. And it's good that Black people are traveling and stuff like that, man. But I think that the travel thing, what I've seen from a lot of Black folks is that they go there for tourism or they go there for leisure, but they're not actually going to with an agenda. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration is. I think from what I've seen on YouTube from a lot of the complaints about people going to Africa is that they're looking for a first world experience in a very developing state. And you're just not going to get that. United States has a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of bureaucratic red tape. Things work because they've had time to mature. In these other countries, that's not necessarily the case. It's not. You get into a car accident, you were saying insurance papers with the driver that you got into a collision with, and insurance company takes care of all that. That sort of system has not really been refined over there. Okay. People, you hear a lot of, if you watch some videos, you'll hear a lot of people walking in the street. You hear a lot of cars with their brakes squealing because they can't afford to get their brakes done because the cost of labor and the cost of maintenance is so astronomical that it becomes a more of a burden on them. And so Africa wants to move into this sort of climate friendly environment where they don't have to have combustible engine vehicles over there. That's where this micromobility comes in. That's where smart city development comes in. That's where infrastructure comes in. And the brothers that I ran into a couple of years ago, and I've discussed this on the Brain Trust many a times, but a lot of the brothers on the continent, a lot of the Africans on the continent would love to do business with Black folks in America. But when you come to these discussions, you hear a lot of inadequacies from Black people, especially Black men. They just completely.
Not to interrupt, can I ask you a question, Mike?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So in terms of, because you said something that really piqued my interest, and you said the smart cities. So especially because you're in those fields, I have a question, and I want to see from somebody who's a little more seasoned, if maybe I'm on the right track of thinking. Are you familiar with not smart cities, but the concept of super cities?
Super cities?
Yeah. So
no. What is a super city? How are you defining that?
So a super city would be, for example, New York City, right? Population, everything is growing up instead of outward. But instead of just New York City, the next city over would be Philadelphia. But everything in between would not be inhabited by at least regular people. It would either be, either rich folks or Mad Max. But basically, the super cities would incubate the population, the mass population, right? And then everything else in between would basically be farmland or terrible. Now, I'm thinking that's probably 50, 100, 200 years down the line. But with things like smart cities, is this kind of likely what we're leaning towards or moving towards as a people?
We don't have any other choice but to go smart, primarily because the technology exists, but we just have not implemented it. But what happens with smart cities, or the idea of a smart city, or any sort of gentrification, becomes impactful to people on the ground. More importantly, Black people are the ones who are dislodged from the environment itself, primarily because the cost of living goes up and they're not included in the development of these sort of cities and technologies. And what you saw last week with the Black woman who was 8 months pregnant, who was arrested because the AI within the criminal justice system or law enforcement system picked out this woman from a lineup that she was never even a part of for a crime that she never committed. That sort of stuff is real. And so when you don't have that inclusiveness in the development of these areas with Black people at the forefront from an ethics standpoint, you're in some serious trouble. And so, and then when you start taking that into the financial standpoint, because they don't understand why the AI is making the decision that it's making, because it's looking at zip code, it's looking at demographics, it's looking at reports on maybe crime for that matter. It could be scouring newspapers, it could be scouring databases. We don't know how all of this is actually working or how it's going to work, primarily because we're not at the table. And if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And so how do we get more Black people cultivated so that we can actually start having more deeper conversations from a Pan-Africanist perspective? Because Africa has no choice but to move into, to leapfrog all of the 20th century ideals that America had to go through. Primarily, a landline is inconceivable over there. They don't even understand what a landline is, right? They actually everybody has 2 cell phones, a smartphone and a dumb phone. That's the way how they live over there. And their phone is completely integrated into their life. If they lose their phone, they lose their identity, they lose everything. It's how they make their money, it's how they make payments, it's how they communicate. In the US, it's not really that way. People go through iPhones like it's water. Because the consumption level is high consumption. Over there, it's not about high consumption, it's about high sustainability. And so we have to change our entire mindset and how we engage tech and innovation.
You know what? I completely agree. And that is a good question. How do we have that conversation? So all too often, and I think this is something, especially from a Pan-Africanist standpoint, we have to move away from entertainment, because what happens is too many things, we need to be entertained too much, which removes us from that table of that conversation. I'll give you an example. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine the other day, and he was being facetious. And I was like, bro, let me finish my statement so you can understand. And then as I start, he goes, no, I'm ignorant. I don't want to hear it. And I realized in our joking how serious that is, especially with our community. I'll give you a further example. Last week, I was down by City Hall, and there was the homeless population that was flooding and crowded around the mayor of my city. And I was talking to the mayor of my city because I also have an issue with the homeless population. Because where I live, I pay a substantial amount of money for my rent. Yet, because there's a lot of people, when you're in a high income area, you attract low income people to, do what they do and beg for money. Well, unfortunately, I get tired of seeing that stuff. Right? Not just me, but the other people who are paying $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 a month for rent. Right? And to live near Yale University. Right? I'm paying a lot of money to say I live near Yale University. Right? And it's difficult because I tried to speak to the people who were speaking to the mayor. And the guy literally said to me, I don't want to hear you. You sound like a politician. And I said, I'm not a politician, though. I'm telling you this from the standpoint of somebody who gets up in the morning every day, busts my ass, and I get tired of having, when I go to Dunkin' Donuts to get my coffee, having you ask me when I go in the door, when I come out the door, every single day for $1. If you came to work with me, because guess what? I beg people for money for a living too. I work on 100% commission. So unless I make a sale, I don't make any money. So I grow very tired of seeing people who will sit on their ass every day and ask 100 people for $1, but aren't willing to do it in the sales aspect, where if one of those people says yes, you can make an annual salary. But they were so ignorant,
So
they didn't even, I'm sorry.
no, go right ahead and finish.
So they were so ignorant, they didn't, it seems like, and I don't want to, I want to kind of put this more in the haves and have-nots, because I don't want to blame all this ignorance on Black people solely. Though I understand that Black people we have the issue, so we don't need to talk about anything other than us. Right? But it's insane to see, and having crossed a certain threshold of a certain income, I can understand how they feel about people like me. But now that I'm at a certain income level, there's certain things that concern me that didn't when I wasn't at that income level. But I'm willing to hear both sides. And it seems like, especially in our community, we're blocked to not hear, oh, I don't even want to hear what that guy says. He's racist. Well, if he's in power, we need to hear what he says. Or if he's trying to get in power, we need to hear what he says, so that if he gets in power, we can be prepared. Because he might say, if I get in power, there's 42 million of them. There's 200 million of us. So if each one of us pulls a gun, we win. We need to know that that's their plan. Right?
Yeah,
Those kind of things. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I understand what you're saying when it comes to when it comes to unhoused people. I think that's more of a systemic issue within city and state government, not building enough affordable housing, not creating enough upward mobility, or creating enough opportunity that leads to upward mobility. I think that happens a lot, but that goes back to my original point about Black men in tech, 45, 48 plus years old. The ageism becomes real, and then you slowly get squeezed out of the industry. What are you going to do next? You can't just rely on your loyals of just being, that you've worked in corporate America all this time, because the glass ceiling is real. It's frosted. I think Black men see it more so than Black women, but I do think that everybody's impacted by this, and we're not actually having a conversation beyond that point. I think we're losing a lot of our labor capacity to corporate America. I think that what corporate America has done to Black communities is it has created a brain drain. You think about Silicon Valley. If you live in New York City, and let's say you live in the Bronx, one of the most economically impacted boroughs, you take one Black man off the block and put him in Silicon Valley, and let's say in Silicon Valley, he's making, as a cybersecurity person, just off the cuff, let's say he's making $200,000 a year. Well, over 10 years, that's more than $1 million that's just been siphoned out of the Bronx neighborhood, the Bronx borough, that could have been recirculated back into their local economy. Now, you can argue that remote work could actually solve that, but that's not necessarily what's happening anymore. We see that there's a huge fight trying to bring folks back into the office, and remote work is one of the most beneficial things that Black people could have ever had from a corporate perspective, and they're trying to take that away. I don't think people are really having a more Afrocentric, Pan-African, pro-Black perspective when it comes to all of this tech innovation and how it's impacting folks. I remember during the pandemic, at the beginning of it, when folks were learning to work remotely, some white folks had a hot mic moment several times. They were saying disparaging things about Black people on Zoom calls and stuff. That's considered to be, to me, that's a hostile work environment. But people are proud to work in these places. I'm saying maybe we should rethink our relationship with this. What's going on, Renaissance Man?
Hey, what's up, Mike? What's up, Lonzo?
Bro?
Chilling, bro.
No, it's funny. We were talking on Lou's panel about work life, about working remote. People trying to come back to the office, work life balance, all of that. And now I was telling them I actually went into the office today, and I literally thought to myself, I could never do this 5 days a week ever again. They're wanting two right now, but it's not mandatory, and I'm like, two is really too much. Like, I only really need to come in when I need to be there, just because a lot of times I don't even really have meetings that are 100% in person. So it's kind of a waste of time, coupled with, my office, at least the department I work in, is not as diverse. So it's just like, you just kind of go from the comfort of your home to, this place where, this office where, you're one of the few Black faces. It can be draining, and you really realize that when you haven't gone in a while. And to your point, yeah, some are pushing back. I think some smaller companies are kind of seeing it, as a recruiting advantage. But we'll see where it goes. But yeah, I think it's one of the best things they can offer Black people, because I mean, everyone I've talked to who's Black work virtual has really, I've yet to meet a Black person who's like, chomping at the bit to go back in the office more. Like, we're cool for remote work. The only thing you have to a little worry about is like, obviously, like career progression. But honestly, to your point on corporate America, as you sort of get more senior, like, it becomes like getting jobs and promotions become a lot more of a headache, in the sense of like, they want you to like reach out to people and like express your interest, and then like build a relationship with them. And then, hey, if a role comes open in your department, then so it goes from when you're younger in your career and you see a job that you like, you can just go apply for it, and to like all this networking and almost like politicking that goes with it. Having the right mentors and this and that. And it's just it'd be kind of frustrating playing that political game versus, just wanting to go in, do your job, be recognized for your work, and move forward. And, that's not, I'm talking about all the, the bias that's going to be in play. If you're someone who is Black trying to move up, the dynamics of, having subordinates who don't look like you, who, may not respect your authority, or, may feel resentful, all of those dynamics come into play.
Yeah, no, it's because what remote work does for Black folks is it creates a safe space for them, where they don't have to actually engage all those microaggressions at the water cooler. Going back to my original or earlier point, was that with these hot mic moments, you're starting to hear folks, badmouth Black people, through Zoom and whatnot, and Teams and Slack. It's just like, I don't know, man. I think we need to rethink our relationship with corporate America. I think that, we're wasting a lot of our labor capacity in cycles and innovation to organizations where our intellectual property is being monopolized by folks that don't like us and don't look like us. We have to rethink that relationship.
No, I agree. Or, at the very
What's going
least,
on, Lou?
Are you good? Go ahead, Renaissance.
Go ahead, Renaissance.
Yeah, go ahead, Renaissance. I'm gonna fall back.
No.
I'm gonna go after you. Go ahead, Renaissance.
No, I was gonna say, or we just gotta, at the very least, I think you gotta rethink sort of the benefits that people are getting and the trade-offs. Like you said, organizations that really aren't too serious about, development or, opportunities, things like that. And, basically, getting Black people's creative work for usually less than its true value. I think all of those things, like I said, are valid points. And to the point on just, being in the office, not having to deal with microaggressions, but then I think just like I said, being in a safe space, even if it's just at home, where, I've heard Black women talk about, they don't have to do their hair. They can let their hair be more natural if they're running into that barrier at work. Of, hey, people being concerned about their hairstyles, or, having to code switch, do things like that, to, just like I said, being in your own space. And then if you do want to, go and have some interaction, people have been going to co-working spaces as well too, where, you can actually choose the people you spend your time with, versus, you may end up someone on your team you don't particularly care for. or just, you know, other people you'd rather spend your time with. So.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. What's going on, Mike? What's up,
Lou.
Renaissance? What's up? Salute to everybody in the chat.
What's up, Lou?
Oh man, that's yeah,
Chilling.
What's up, bro?
you know what's the funny I got an example about being in the Navy, right? Because the Navy kind of purport itself to be like a corporation in a lot of ways. They like to run it like one. So I use that as like my corporate America type experience. So when I was in the Navy, right, I'll never forget this was my like the equivalent of like a supervisor, like a manager. So I had to so when you get a tattoo, right, you kind of gotta like route it. You don't really have to, but it's just kind of formal to do it. You gotta like put a chit in to like say you about to get a tattoo. So I was getting a tattoo. You know what she said? She asked, would a tattoo show up on me? Like but that goes like the micro. I'm not even
Wow.
that. I mean, I'm not even that dark skinned to be honest. And you can see the tattoo. Like if you ever saw my tattoo, like you can see it clear as day. But that just goes to show like the microaggressions. You see what I'm saying? Like I was like, you know what I mean? Like because at the time, you know, like when they just say something like that to you, you don't really like, you know, it just shocks you. It's like, how, like what can a tattoo show? What the,
Believe
like,
it or
what,
not, though,
you
a
know what
lot
I'm
of
saying?
that is sheer ignorance, right? Because remember, a lot of these folks, for simple math, a lot of white folks really have not actually interacted with black folks. I'm not saying that wasn't a microaggression. I get it. But believe it or not, a lot of that crazy wonderance, oh my God, can I touch your hair? All that shit comes from because of the propaganda on TV. Back to Mike's earlier point, our image is that of the thug, the gangster, the drug
Pop
dealer, the
culture.
criminal. Right. And so when people see us in public and it's not on Fox News on their TV at home, they may not have actually seen us in person outside of the one or two guys that they work with. And they're like, oh, you're not like the rest of the black guys that I see on TV. And so everybody becomes a monolith to them. I'm not excusing that shit at all, because I know the microaggressions too. I done been through them. But sometimes it is just pure idiocy as well.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying, Renaissance. I mean, dude, I'm talking about for the last 3 through like my job, my internship, bro. I have been the only black person on the team, bro. Like, it's not even. I mean, it's at this point, I kind of just expect it. You know what I mean? If I ever had another black person on my team, that'll be like that'll be like some type of falling star or something. You know, like some eclipse or something. Like,
And be
I
like,
mean,
let me look at the paperwork. Who messed up? It's only supposed to be one of us here.
yeah, I'll give you this. So like the company will have black people, but I don't even have. You know, they keep us like separate. It's almost like they keep us separate. You know, it's like you'll see them on like the directory, like like people or like a town hall, Zoom call. You'll see like the other black people around. Like maybe in like DC or something like Colorado or something like that, whatever, right? But yeah, for the most part, I'm the only black person, so yeah, 100% agree. And then but back to the remote thing though as well. Man, I look at it also as like a pay raise because, I mean, you're not spending money that you would going to the office, right? Like you're not spending money on gas. You save time as well.
Don't
Not
say
being
that
in
too loud.
traffic.
Don't say that too loud. Some bosses may think, "What? Oh, okay." I give him a 3% instead of 5% raise.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Lou
I guess
liked
I
them
mean.
lemon pepper.
Oh, go ahead, Wizard.
Yeah, Lou liked them lemon pepper wings, man. You like the lemon pepper wings, man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I love them lemon pepper wings. With a lemonade, yes, sir. So,
See, you ain't nothing there, man.
Yes, yeah.
yeah, so, but yeah, man, I mean, we talked about the other day. I don't have to get up and like, I had to get up too early. I don't have to worry about beating traffic. I just wake up, yawn, you know what I'm saying? Brush my teeth, slide on that computer, check the email. I'm good. Like, it's crazy, bro. It's just the best. And we had a stream on the other day. I was a brother was saying he wanted to get into tech remote, and I was kind of like, you know what though? I mean, I wasn't trying to diss him or nothing. I mean, I wasn't trying to deter him. I mean, but I was like, bro, do you really want to be in the tech, or do you want to work remote? Like, you kind of need to be honest with yourself. You know what I'm saying? Is it really? And also at the same time, not all working remote is the same, right? You can have one of these remote call center jobs, and you just a slave to the, you know what I'm saying, to the desk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I come into the office, Lou. My fault. I think we're dropping.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
But no, I come into the office primarily because most of my team members are black and male.
Really?
And so, in cybersecurity, they did a mass hiring after George Floyd. Man, they started filling a lot of roles with brothers, and so that's the only reason I come into the office. I don't come into the office for any other reason. We got Nigerian brothers, we got Haitian brothers, we got Verdian brothers, we got a whole litany of smorgasbord of black men in the office, Jamaican, other Caribbean folks. They did a mass hiring. So I think they did a good job there, but that's where the DEI tends to fail, because how are you measuring progress, right? Where's the metrics for all of this? I don't see any transparency there. And so
you don't run
these
into
guys,
with,
they were there before me, long before.
You don't run into any problems, Mike, with flat blackness, all those brothers from different parts of diaspora.
I don't know if I don't like that term of flat blackness. I think what happens here is that white people just see everybody as black anyway. So it's not necessarily about a specific term. It's how they engage folks, but how they differentiate people is through accent, right? And so if you got a Caribbean accent or African accent, for that matter, they can kind of pick off, who's who from what. But the aggressions are still the same. We still see folks who are, and this happens more with black men than it does with black women. I think primarily because of masculinity. Black masculinity is still a challenge for a lot of folks. They don't really know how to deal with taking orders from people. They don't really know how to deal with someone whose knowledge may be more superior. And so that is still a challenge in the workspace, even after George Floyd. And it hasn't really done really much anyways at this point, primarily because what I'm seeing here is that the BLM banners have gone down, the tape's starting to, lose its adhesive and starting to peel off, and, the fever is over. And so, okay, what's next? DEI officers are, not the thing anymore. What's going on here? I feel like a lot of black folks are in the sunken place, especially black men in the sunken place, going 50 plus into the tech industry. That's a very scary place. Now, if you're young, you can kind of have some room to maneuver, but when you're 50 plus, that becomes a problem. What are you going to do?
Well, let's be honest, Mike. The issue is that a lot of men, I'm sorry, but a lot of black men, 40, 50, 40 plus, are, unfortunately, when we were in high school, we didn't pay attention to get into tech. So now we're behind the 8 ball. So now we have very few options besides things like tech and entry level. So what do you say to somebody who's 40, waking up like, holy shit, I don't have anything, and now needs to compete with a kid who's 23, who off of TikTok can make $110,000 over the weekend and go? You know what I mean? Like, where do I go from there? What can we possibly do? Who can I lean on? Can I come to you and look for a job? But right now, you don't even have the support to make that infrastructure, right? You don't have the support from enough of us, honestly, to even create something for us. So now we have this vicious cycle.
No, I agree. It's in general, and at that point too, you kind of run into like you said, that problem. And even if you truth be told, you run into some people who will run into the sort of opposite issue as well, is that even if you have the experience, you'll run into people who are younger who will do the job for less, and companies trying to look to get you out of there as well. So it's you kind of face it on all sides as a Black dude, unfortunately. I was going to ask you though, Lou. You said you've never had a Black person on your team, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, it's weird because I've had it both ways. I've had it when when I haven't, and then I have it when I have. And I mean, I can definitely say like, there's more benefit in my mind definitely to having someone on, because you just kind of have someone that has your back. Especially if y'all are really in a minority in an environment like that. You got that sense of someone's got your back. But then it's funny too, because like other non-Black people will see that y'all are cool, y'all are tight, and they'll almost like treat you like you're kind of their keeper, in the sense of like, oh, we're so and so. It's like I don't know where this guy is 24/7. Like
Yeah, but you know what? And it's funny you say that, because like it's a pretty big excuse me, it's a pretty big company. I mean, they have Black people. Like they have, it has a cafeteria. And when anytime I do go in and I see the people in the cafeteria, like I'll see the Asians linked up. I mean, well, it's kind of like funny, right? Because they can kind of get away with it by saying they're on the same team, but in reality they're all Asian. You know what I'm saying? They can kind of get away with it. But I remember, I run into a Black dude, it'd be like a head nod or something like that. But then a lot of times we're in like different. I guess what I really meant to say, like when it's time I run into somebody Black, like how Mike said, a lot of Black people cybersecurity. I've noticed that on the internet as well. Like online, most Black people I run into that are in tech, they don't do what I do per se. You know what I mean? So like I just see Black dev in the chat. Yeah, I've never ran into another Black software developer. Like that's very like few and far in between. I'm not saying, I know they're out there. You know what I'm saying? It's just I've just not been fortunate enough to have another brother on the team. It just hasn't happened. Now I haven't even had a Black woman on my team. Now that I think about it, I've had Asian women, an Iranian woman, rest be white dudes, and a few Latinos. I had a few Latinos on my team, but I'm always the only Black dude.
So I hear you guys also talking a lot
Luke,
go ahead.
No, go right ahead, Alonzo. I'll go after.
So I hear you gentlemen speaking a lot in the tech side, and I love tech, right? But I hear a lot of like the engineering side, and a lot of that is an aspect where, as Black men, if we're behind the 8 ball and we're 40, entry level, we're not going to cut it. Or back to what Renaissance Man said, you're facing the ageism. My question now would be, in terms of like tech sales, do we know the demographics of Black men that are in tech sales? Because tech and pharmaceutical sales kind of trumps everything. It gives you that ability that we can take our gift of gab or our gravitas and actually build financially for ourselves, so that fiscally we can pass down and then have other generations go into things. But I think the fastest way to generate revenue is and always will be sales. Are we driving men to tech sales as well?
That's a good question. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I think
jump on that.
Yeah, I think, Alonzo, I think a part of the issue is that tech sales has always been run by the good old boys. It's been the good old boys network. And so they have largely kept Black folks, Black men in particular, out of that, because they kind of share a lot of the social networks that they have. And if you're not tapped into those social networks, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And that's where MBA programs really come in, to really build, and expand on those social networks. But to Lou's point earlier about seeing other folks in the office doing the same thing, what I see is that there's not a lot of decision making at that level either. although black folks are in the office, they're not the ones making the decisions. You still have that proverbial glass ceiling. It is frosted and it is tainted. And then and it makes it difficult for any sort of upward mobility to create and facilitate that that outreach that would be necessary to expand the group. And so, although you have people in the workplace that look like you, they're not pulling any strings at all. And so that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the tech sales. I am not against tech sales at all. I'm actually for it. I do say though, right? Like tech sales has a higher ceiling, right, than engineering, but it has a lower floor. You see what I'm saying? And you have a more consistent income
It's
over
like it's like Lou, you said you're accounting. It's like accounting versus finance in that regard. Like accounting is more stable. But you got a lower floor. But finance. I'm sorry, but you got a lower floor. But finance, you got a higher ceiling.
Right, because exactly like sales, you can make. If you get if you get your OTEs, you get your commissions, you can go over like a senior engineer, right, at maximum. But starting out, engineer can start out at like on the low end, maybe like 75, 80, and maybe like a tech salesperson start out at the low end, like 50, 40, 55, something like that. And that might hit, maybe 65, 70, maybe if they hit the commissions, right? But that's not a bad, because like I was saying that one stream about sales engineer, that's kind of like you're like the tech person in the sales call or whatever. Like you're kind of doing demos or you're answering the questions to the client about the specific tech, and you're kind of like the middleman between the engineers who are going to use it and the people who are going to buy it, the decision makers. So I'm not against it though. I mean, you definitely can make some money in tech sales. It's just like what Mike said though. A lot of people are just not getting on it. It's just because all these new startups and SaaS and B2B SaaS operations, they're higher. What I mean? So it's kind of blown up recently, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a way, man. I mean, here you send me some 150 OTE or something like that with some RSUs, I'll jump shit right now. Do it. I'll do it right now. I'll do that jump right.
The thing with tech sales too is you got to be it's a very unique skill set in the sense of people in tech are usually kind of stereotyped as, not having, being very technical, but, lack high IQ, but lacking on sort of the emotional intelligence at time. And that's where that really comes in with sales and things like that or being even a leader amongst like technical people is that you have enough knowledge to know the technical. You don't have to be the expert or the smartest person, but you have the people skills to motivate people and be able to work with people. And that becomes more important just as you move up in general.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, that's a fact. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of, and it's kind of an uphill battle in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of Black people don't really see it as an advice. I don't, maybe that's changing with the millennials and Gen Z, hopefully. But, just look over like most degrees aren't really STEM related per se. And it's not really a lot of career aspirations. Cause I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, like, you look at these like tech founders, I mean, these white dudes, they look up to them, but I mean, hey, we kind of look up to Michael Jordan, I mean, it just is what it is. It kind of sucks, but it's the way it is. We'll have to do it brick by brick, step by step. And that's why I said on that one stream, a lot of people agree, a lot of people disagree. But I was like, hey, man, you might have to start flexing. You might have to start, showing that big body Benz to the kids. I'm sorry. Hey, if you want, that might we have to do,
Sometimes you got to flex.
Maybe I mean, hey, what I'm saying? When they saw Mark Zuckerberg doing his flex, because everybody flexes in a specific way. Bill Gates owns like 40 supercars. Jeff Bezos spending $60,000 a day or something like that. I mean, it's just all types of stuff. You got to just be privy to it on what type of flexing it is. I'm not saying get the gold chain or grill in the mouth, but it's got to show you doing it. And I do see it though. I mean, I see a lot of change though, especially like on TikTok. Like you see, like black dudes on TikTok, they get money and stuff like that. So I think it's gonna change. My bad. I didn't mean to ramble. Y'all go ahead.
Nah, you perfect, bro. You was cooking, man. I think we was all vibing and agreeing with your point. My thing is though, right? Even though it's an uphill battle and there is a low floor, sales in general, right? It's a high turnover because it's a hard thing to do. But I think that an influx of black men in sales, specifically in this particular conversation, tech sales, would be it could change the industry in itself. And then maybe you have more men who at a younger age start looking at getting into the engineering and things, right? So that now you can compete with the Zucks and such who are 19 on college campuses, because as we're seeing, the world is moving way faster, right? And especially in our community, a certain age bracket never let go. Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton, they were 19 years old when they started their revolutions. They were 27 when they died, right? So we got to start enforcing in our youth, hey, you got to kind of put your axe to the grind now, right? Because we're telling everybody, hey, by 30, but by 19, Stokely Carmichael was fighting with SUNY Downstate Medical Facility. It's a renowned medical facility in Brooklyn, New York, to this day, right? So at 19, making those kind of monumental moves, we can push that. But the older guys, we still don't need to be washed away, but we still need to get into something that can have, because the alternative is a lot of dudes going to work at McDonald's for $15 an hour. And the problem is there's no title and there's no prestige with those jobs. At least in tech sales, you can say you have some prestige with the jobs and you can leave McDonald's for the majority of the 19-year-olds, because there's only going to be one Zuckerberg and just like one LeBron James. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant.
No, you know what? I'm glad you said that. I want to ask everybody, would you guys agree that tech is low status but mid to high paid? Would y'all agree that it could be considered low status? And what I mean by that, like, to elaborate, like lawyer and doctor, that's high status, right? Like you can at a family reunion, oh, I'm a doctor, that you can walk with your chest out, right? But if you say, oh, I'm a software engineer, or I'm a cybersecurity, social security engineer, or I'm a sister, like, you know what I mean? Would you guys agree with that?
It doesn't hold the same equal weight as a doctor or a lawyer or a judge or something like that, because it's not a leadership role that you may be referring to. Like a software engineer is just that, there's just a developer or a coder for that matter. But when you start talking about, PhDs and Juris Doctorates, it's a little bit different of a conversation.
Also, people don't understand.
And it's relatively new. Like
people can understand if you're a judge or an accountant or a lawyer or something. People can, I even though I don't know what you do, you could just be an ambulance chaser, but he's a lawyer, so I know he does something with law. And when you're a software engineer, I don't quite know what you do, so it doesn't quite hold as much weight to people because people don't understand what you do.
Well, I think it's newer too. I mean, saying I'm in cybersecurity, that didn't really become popular until obviously the internet was adopted in mass. So versus, lawyers have always had prestige going back to, really the founding of the country. Same thing with like doctors. So that's an element of it as well. But I'd argue that like also you have to realize that you have people in cybersecurity who can easily make just as much as both of those professions. It kind of gets into the what you're making, Lou, is more of a socioeconomic type of argument that, that prestige sort of ties in, and the amount of schooling that goes into it as well, especially if you're talking about, someone who has done cybersecurity, but, has kind of gotten by just on certs versus, going to law school, that's 4 years undergrad, 3 years of grad school, and then, passing the bar exam, or, being a doctor, going to school, undergrad 4 years, going 3 years of medical school, and then, doing the residency, and then, doing your specialty as well too. So all those play into it.
Yeah, the only status you would probably get is if you work at like a FANG or something. If you say you work at Facebook or Google, that's probably about the highest status you could reach.
And the funny thing is, I didn't
own your own tech company. But go ahead.
No, I didn't even realize too. Like Microsoft, they were, after they did their layoffs, I saw something that said something like 70% of employees said if they could, they'd leave the company just because they laid off all these people, but then they had record profits. So they were just saying, the CEO was kind of just talking out of one side of his mouth and, doing something else. So some of those may be losing the prestige as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with not being able to reach your potential in some of these organizations that, it may have been posted out to be. They have these sort of promotionals you can be doing this at Microsoft and you can have this sort of title and whatnot. And I know a lot of people who are quote unquote associate director because they're trapped inside of a pay scale that they can't get out of. So you have the glamorous title, but you don't have the pay. And so that becomes a challenge. And I think a lot of folks that, these, the FANGs, like Citizen Lou was saying, was that, it gets tiring after a while. Once you go through that cycle, you're like, yeah, I've been there and done that. I don't want to do that. But that's where that goes back to my original, point that I was making earlier that, okay, so where do Black men go next? I think we need to figure out a way to create or carve out a space in the industry for ourselves and actually start innovating from there and actually being a lot more inclusive with ourselves rather than with these organizations, because they're getting big tax incentives and stuff like that, with DEI programs and whatnot. But it's not really translating into anything beyond that because there's no metrics to really measure, what the progress is.
Hey, Mike, how common is that? Because it's funny, I talked to another brother when I was doing my master's program, and he sort of said the same thing. He was a Scrum Master, but he was saying he was talking to his mentor, and he changed companies. He was working for, I think he was working for like a financial institution, and he changed. He actually works for Nike now. But he was saying one of his mentors ran into that same issue of he had this title, but he didn't have the pay. And when he was telling him about his gig, he was saying, he had the pay and not necessarily the title. So I guess that's pretty common.
It is.
I think,
it is for the most part.
I think it's more common with the title and not. Yeah, I think it's more common with the title and not the pay rather than the pay and not the title. Because what happens here is, the quote unquote, the example of the associate director, what does that really mean, right? What do you don't really have any real decision-making potential. You just have orders that are delegated to you, and you're kind of the fall guy for everything. So it doesn't really have any value at the end of the day. It's like being a head cook at McDonald's. That's cool and all, but I don't know if Outback Steakhouse or whatever these one of the chain restaurants is going to be hiring at any point based on that title and that skill set. And so I think Black people, from a DEI perspective, get trapped in these sort of titles and roles, and that becomes the disdain for either the industry or for the job itself. And I've seen quite a few people, a lot of people that I know in cybersecurity have left already that I came in with. They're pretty much out of there. And so I think the turnover rate tends to be higher. Stress tends to be more. Say it again.
I said it's designed that way. I mean, it's designed for you to not go as far and to have like a title and not have to work anywhere else above that, or even have the authority to even go with the actual title itself. Like if you were to put women or substitute women for like Black men in those actual positions, they actually have to do that for women. With Black men, they don't really have to do that at all, because most of these people just want the actual title without the pay. They don't want to do the hard work. They just don't. Like even now, the city that I'm in now, person we're talking to has a title, not to pay. I'm like, okay, so what certifications or what are you doing? Like, nah, man, I'm good where I'm at. Good where you at? I'm like, that sounds nice, but you do know that you're setting the bar for every single person that comes behind you, right? And they're kind of okay with it. And it's literally designed that way to give you a title and no pay. But most people want to rest on their laurels because they're kind of quote unquote the only one when they get there that they are okay with their position when they are there. And those people don't really reach out, don't really try to mentor anybody. They really stay real isolated in that position. No one knows what they do. They just know that this person just works there. They're in this position. There's no really authority that's asserted anywhere within the environment, but they have this position. That's kind of where it is with all companies. AT&T, Comcast, Level 3, same thing. You see those Black dudes who are there, upper 40s, maybe early 50s, and they're pretty much nothing but just a placeholder that doesn't have any authority associated with it, and they don't even try to mentor or try to get anybody else in those positions. But white dudes know what that position means, and they avoid these people like the plague itself. And damn, it's kind of bad though. But
well, because the perception for white men is that they should be in leadership positions no matter what.
No matter what.
Black people should be subordinate to them. That's kind of because a Black person in that role, and I've talked about this before, that the only cybersecurity Black cybersecurity CEO right now is Corey at Rapid7, and so the idea of Black men taking orders from Black men in the workplace, man, becomes a challenge because folks are just not, they don't really know how to make that adjustment. It's the same thing in every industry. I think the NBA has had that issue initially. The NFL has that issue, the Rooney Rule and all that stuff. Folks are just not ready to accept that Black men, or Black people for that matter, but Black men in particular, could have equal or greater knowledge on subject matter and be in a position of leadership. They just cannot accept that. That is, the microaggressions come out. You'll see it.
No, it's kind of the cognitive dissonance, because you have a society that basically says, hey, you're better, but the second you walk out the door, and even inside that door, but then here you are taking orders from, this person that's supposed to be inferior to you based on, the society socialization and all these things. So that's part of it. And to your point, MOT, on, the only reason you want to be in a situation where you have the title and don't have anything to go with it is if you're getting the experience that will lead to something. Because that's one thing I do tell people is that, if you're getting experience that will lead to more money, but you're not necessarily getting the money, then get the experience and then go somewhere else and leverage it, versus not getting the experience because you didn't get the money immediately.
Correct, but a lot of these people want to language in those type of spots. It's too many stories where I've seen people who got those type of positions and kind of just rested there until they liquidated the entire department and their ass along with it. And then when they try to go get a job somewhere else, they know what that job position actually means. And they pretty much are not even in the industry IT-wise, even though they quote unquote was a supervisor for 10 plus years. Can't get a job as a Scrum developer, can't get a job as a whole bunch of things. But it's just that a lot of people just have to learn that this moving up thing is a constant ongoing thing. You have to be constantly ongoing, working towards something. You can't just rest at what you perceive as the top or that you've done enough. That's all I'm pretty much saying.
Renaissance, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say it's like it's like being in my company. It's like being a quote unquote leader with no direct reports. It's kind of like, yeah, you may have this salary, but like, you know, to your point, if there's budget cuts, like that's an easy target, or consolidation of departments, because it's like, hey, why is this person like a quote unquote manager with no direct reports? And then on top of that, you lose the actual, you know, experience or managerial experience that you would gain in that situation as well. Like you don't actually get it. So it's like you go out to interview, like you said, and they'll ask, well, you know, okay, this person's been a manager for how many years? Okay, how many people have you hired? And it's like, none. It doesn't look good.
That makes sense. It's like, so you had the title with none of the responsibility. And so, see, here's where that becomes difficult as well, especially if and when we further our network of Black men. Because I know for a material fact that men in other communities will get high-powered positions in municipalities, and their resume will be that of, you know, they won't say that they were with a Big Four accounting firm, but they were with another quite large accounting firm based out of Long Island that happens to be a member of the same Yiddish community. And this person never has actually done any of what the resume states he has done. But he's gotten this position at said municipality based on the merit of the words of the other gentleman, who basically vouched for him on his resume. Yeah, this kid worked at my accounting firm for XYZ years doing this, that, and the third, though the kid actually didn't have the actual experience. But those kind of, if you will, firewalls are kind of something I was talking about earlier today about rites of passage for Black men. Literally, you know, if you're going around the Temple of Solomon, you know, the second time through, you might just let him pass. You know what I mean? Sorry, Duran, I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, it happens. I think it happens less with Black people than it does with white people. And I think that's what Mark Zuckerberg was kind of saying a couple months ago about, you know, firing middle managers. You know, I think they thanked Amazon or whoever it was that had started the tech layoff process, and they started going after these middle managers. And that's what associate director becomes, right? You know, a middle manager, you know, responsible for all, but no, you know, delegation, you know, to none. I think that is where we are. I see it less with Black people than I do with white people in the tech industry, but it's just one of those things that I don't see a whole lot of discussion around it, at least not in this space. I know I peruse a couple of different platforms. I don't really see them having this discussion at that level. I know, you know, there's a couple of summits that happen, like Black Tech Week out in Ohio. I know there's another one that happened in Atlanta maybe a week or so ago.
There's Afro Tech coming up in October.
I don't really see it happening. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really see too much of it happening down there either, because they're really white adjacent too. Although it's Afro Tech, they're very white adjacent. Because why does Afro Tech always seems to happen in you know, in almost non-Black spaces, not necessarily Black spaces? I don't know. I just think that, just my closing thoughts. What's happening in the industry right now is a major shift with AI. Black people have to really reevaluate their relationship with corporate America. I think that corporate America, we're at the end of our rope with this. I don't really see too much progress happening. The attack on critical race theory, the attack on DEI initiatives all around the country. We may have to start rethinking all of this and going back to the table and working from scratch.
Going back to the table, that may mean something else.
Oh no! Back to the table.
Unbelievable.
No. I was going to say the one thing I will say about the layoffs is I think it could be an element of like trying to reset some of these salaries as well. Because if you notice during the pandemic, tech was hiring like crazy, and the pay was just it was crazy what people were getting paid. But now they're the big ones laying off. But, data has always shown that like a lot of times layoffs are not really driven by actual like financial changes, like that people do it. Like people do it because they'll see other companies do it. Like there's an article, I believe, in the Harvard Business Review, as well as I think in one published a study out of Stanford as well, that just shows that like a lot of layoffs are just one company sees them doing layoffs. So they follow suit of the next one in the industry. And I think you saw that kind of with the Microsoft example in tech of where, they laid off all these people, but, their profits were amazing in their earnings. So I think some of that is going on too. It's just that, hey, people are like, hey, we don't want to pay all these high salaries and this and that. So this is kind of like corporate America's way of trying to reset, with the inflation you saw, kind of like they're trying right now with interest rates to like reset the housing market as well.
Yeah, I think it might be an overall economic change with the layoffs. I think it is a follow the leader effect, if you will. But also kind of more onto your point, it may be like an economic rebalancing because, like you said, there was a boom of these tech hires because there wasn't an end to the need of tech, and it was hopefully to advance everything a little bit faster, which isn't exactly necessary when right now every single damn near month at this point in tech we have an innovation that would destroy the last 100 years worth of innovation, right? Or would take 100 years. From the 1800s, it was the steam engine. That was the big thing, and then we got to the car. Nobody was thinking about cell phones that looked into your refrigerator and told you when you needed an oil change on your car and told you it's time to feed your baby and walk the dog. So things maybe had been meant to move faster, and now that we're kind of going back to a form of normalcy. Things have changed because one thing that social distancing changed was social interaction through social media, which literally changed socialization. And I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button on the way out. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust.